All right, ready for a deep dive into a world I bet you haven't thought much about.
Hit me with it. What are we tackling today?
Today, it's all about poultry breeding.
Poultry breeding, like the people who make sure we have chickens for, well, everything.
You got it.
Huh.
We're talking about the folks who don't just collect the eggs, they engineer the chickens that lay them. And I gotta say, after digging through RoleCatcher's resources, career guides, the FAQs, even interview tips, I'm already surprised by how much goes into it.
It's funny, right? Most of us picture farmers just tossing feed around. But a poultry breeder is more like a chicken scientist. It's this whole blend of animal science, genetics, even data analysis, all to, shape the future of chicken dinners everywhere.
No kidding.
Yeah.
RoleCatcher breaks down these career stages, and even at the starting line, forget just feeding time. We're talking biosecurity protocols, series data collection, assisting with breeding programs.
Yeah, it's not exactly chasing chickens around a field.
Right. It's way more involved than I ever imagined.
Oh, absolutely. And as you climb the ranks, you're the one selecting birds for like specific traits. You're managing the genetic diversity of whole flocks, even working with hatcheries and other big players in the industry. It's like being the architect of the poultry world, really.
And speaking of the industry, get this. RoleCatcher says it's changing crazy fast. New tech is popping up left and right, and then there's the whole consumer demand for organic and free-range products, which is blowing up.
Which leads to a pretty important question. What kind of poultry breeder would you want to be? Are we talking mass production, focusing on those high-yield breeds? Or are you more drawn to, say, heritage breeds for a smaller farm-to-table market?
Right. So many options. But RoleCatcher keeps it real. They list the pros, flexible hours, good earning potential, but also the cons.
Yeah, they don't sugarcoat it.
Not at all. They're upfront about the fact that it's physically demanding, the market can be unpredictable, and you're responsible for the well-being of, like, thousands of birds.
And that's not even mentioning the hazards. We're talking dust, odors, some serious heavy lifting. It's not for everyone, that's for sure.
Definitely not your average desk job. It's real deal agriculture. But, you know, for someone who's passionate about animal welfare, who's fascinated by the science behind it all, and who's up for a challenge, well, it sounds like it could be incredibly rewarding.
Oh, for the right person, absolutely. And RoleCatcher goes above and beyond. They even give you sample interview questions and answers, which I thought was pretty cool.
Okay, now that's got to be helpful. Like, what kind of curveballs are we talking about here?
Well, imagine being asked, how do you manage genetic diversity in your breeding program? Or how do you stay updated with the latest technology in the field? They want to know you're not just in it for the fluffy chicks.
Wow, they really get into it. I never would have thought about any of that.
Most people don't. And that's the beauty of these deep dives. Even seemingly simple things like, how we get our chicken are often way more complex and interesting than we realize.
Speaking of complex, RoleCatcher really breaks down those career stages. They even get into what each stage might look like day to day.
They do. They paint a pretty detailed picture. So, for example, those entry-level positions often involve a lot of assisting with the day-to-day care of the birds.
Okay, so we're talking feeding, cleaning, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Making sure those poultry houses are in tip-top shape. But it's not just grunt work. You're also collecting and recording data on the flock's growth, their performance. And let me tell you, this data is pure gold.
Wait, data is gold. What, are these chickens mining Bitcoin on the side or something?
Not quite. But this data helps breeders track how well their breeding programs are working, how healthy the flock is overall. It's important stuff.
So it's like instead of panning for gold in a river, they're looking for nuggets of information in spreadsheets.
Exactly. And as you can imagine, the more experience you gain, the more responsibility you take on.
Which brings us to what? Junior poultry breeders. What are those folks up to?
They're starting to play a much more hands-on role in actually developing and running those breeding programs.
Okay, so they're doing more than just collecting the data at this point.
Right. They're analyzing all that data we talked about, making decisions about the bird's care, and getting way more involved in managing the health and welfare of the entire flock.
So they're leveling up, moving from data entry to data interpretation, but it's still all about the data.
It really is. Because that data helps them with some pretty critical tasks, like choosing which birds to breed, which ones to, cull from the program. Ultimately, they're shaping the genetic future of the flock.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure. So at this level, they're making decisions that could impact, like, generations of chickens.
Yeah, exactly. And let's not forget, they're often overseeing the hatching and rearing of the chicks, too. I'm sure that comes with its own set of challenges and rewards.
Oh, I bet. Sounds like they're getting hands-on experience with pretty much every stage of a chicken's life. And what's interesting is that they're starting to collaborate more with other departments too, right? Like nutrition, veterinary care.
Right. It's a team effort to make sure those production outcomes are top-notch. And speaking of teams, those collaboration skills become even more important as you move into a senior breeder role.
Okay, so we've climbed the ladder, reached the top. Well, Harold, what's it like being the head honcho of the hen house?
Well, at senior level, you're essentially the captain of the ship. You're setting the direction for the entire breeding program, overseeing everything, making sure it all runs smoothly. And of course, you're managing teams of breeders and technicians.
So not only do you need a deep understanding of the science, but you also need serious leadership and management skills. That's no small feat.
You got it. And you're also the one responsible for making sure those poultry health and welfare practices are top-notch, implementing new ones, optimizing old ones. It's a big job.
Which probably means staying up to date on all the latest research, right?
Oh, absolutely. You got to be in the know. At this level, you're using data not just to track progress, but to figure out how to make the breeding program even better, make strategic decisions about the future of the whole operation.
Wow, talk about pressure. It sounds like a challenging but incredibly rewarding role for the right person.
For sure. You could say that. At this point, it's not just about breeding chickens. It's about shaping the future of poultry production.
That's a pretty incredible legacy to leave behind. But even at the top of their game, RoleCatcher emphasizes that poultry breeders need to be lifelong learners.
They do, and for good reason. The poultry industry is constantly evolving. Always new technologies and practices popping up.
So how do they even keep up with it all? Does RoleCatcher have any suggestions?
They do. They're big on attending industry events, joining those professional associations, participating in online communities, subscribing to all the relevant publications, basically immersing yourself in the world of poultry.
So it's all about networking, constantly learning new things, never getting complacent.
Exactly. And when it comes to poultry breeding, that constant learning can be the difference between a thriving flock and, well, not so much. It impacts the health of the birds, the sustainability of the industry, even the quality of the poultry we see in the grocery store.
Speaking of which, one thing that really stood out to me in the RoleCatcher guide was just how important data analysis is in poultry breeding. Can we dig into that a little deeper? What kind of data are we even talking about, and why is it so crucial in this line of work?
Absolutely. Data is like the magic ingredient in modern poultry breeding. It's what lets breeders make informed decisions about, well, everything. Selecting the best birds for breeding, creating the optimal feed, even preventing potential disease outbreaks. And one of the most critical pieces of data they keep track of is something called the FCR.
The FCR. Okay, now you're just speaking chicken to me, I think. What is that? Some kind of top secret chicken code?
Huh. It does sound a little like that, doesn't it? It stands for feed conversion ratio.
Feed conversion ratio. Okay, gotta admit, that doesn't sound super exciting at first glance. What's the big deal with this FCR?
I know, right? Sounds very technical. But it's actually pretty simple. Imagine you're feeding a flock of chickens. You'd want to know, like, how much feed they need to put on weight. Yeah, that's basically what the FCR tells you.
So a good FCR means the chickens are turning that feed into, like, juicy chicken breasts and drumsticks more efficiently.
Exactly. And that's good news for everyone, really.
Hmm.
It's good for the farmers because it saves them money on feed, and it's good for the planet because it means less waste, less land used to grow that feed.
Wow, so these poultry breeders, they're like accidental environmentalists in a way.
In a way, yeah. It's a great example of how data can actually help make things more sustainable.
That's really cool. It's like they're not just breeding chickens, they're breeding solutions. And speaking of solutions, RoleCatcher also talks about how important it is to breed for disease resistance, right?
Oh, absolutely. We talked about the risk of disease outbreaks earlier, how that's a major challenge in poultry farming.
Right, right.
Well, imagine if you could breed birds that are naturally tougher, less likely to get sick in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. Healthier birds means less need for antibiotics and medications, which has got to be better for everyone involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a win-win. And it actually ties into another big thing RoleCatcher highlights, animal welfare.
Yeah.
You know, these days, people really care about how the animals are treated, right?
Yeah, for sure. Nobody wants to think about chickens being mistreated.
Right. So there's this push for higher welfare standards across the board.
Which makes sense ethically, but it's also good business, I'd imagine.
Exactly. And that's where poultry breeders come in. They're not just focused on, like, how many eggs a chicken can lay. They're also thinking about the bird's overall well-being.
So breeding for strong legs, good feathering, things like that.
Yeah. And even temperament. A calmer chicken is a less stressed chicken, which is better all around.
It's like they say, happy chickens, healthy chickens.
Exactly. And happy, healthy chickens tend to be more productive too, so it all comes back around. This whole thing about animal welfare, it's not just coming from consumers either. The industry itself is realizing that treating animals well just makes sense on every level.
Right. It's like they say, you can lead a horse to water.
Huh, exactly.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's more like a happy chicken lays a better egg.
Yeah.
And speaking of what makes a good poultry breeder, RoleCatcher doesn't shy away from the hard parts either. They talk about both the pros and the cons of a poultry breeding career, remember.
We did talk about the cons, yeah. The demanding work, the potential hazards, that huge responsibility. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. But we should talk about those pros too. There's got to be some serious upsides to make up for all that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, for anyone who loves animals, you're working with these creatures every day, and you're part of this industry that literally helps feed the world. Poultry is a huge source of protein everywhere, and as the population keeps growing, that demand's only going to go up.
That's a good point. It's a career with a lot of purpose, Knowing you're making a difference on that scale has got to be rewarding.
It really is. And while it can be tough, RoleCatcher mentions that there's often a lot of flexibility, especially if you end up running your own operation.
Okay, so maybe not your typical 9-to-5 office job.
Exactly. You're the boss, setting your own hours. Plus, the earning potential can be really good. Poultry breeder salaries can be quite competitive, especially with experience.
Not to mention the satisfaction of building a successful business, right? From the ground up, or I guess from the chicken coop up.
Huh, I like that. And speaking of building a successful career, let's talk about the skills and qualifications you'd actually need to make it in the poultry breeding world.
Okay, so first and foremost, you got to know chickens, right? Are we talking like animal science 101?
Absolutely. A strong foundation in animal science is essential. You need a good understanding of poultry biology, genetics, nutrition, all of it.
So a degree in animal science, something like that, is probably the best place to start.
It definitely helps. Most employers want to see some formal education in the field. But RoleCatcher also says that experience can be just as valuable.
So if you've spent years on a farm, getting your hands dirty, learning the ropes firsthand, that counts for something.
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of successful poultry breeders who learned everything on the job.
That's good to know. But I'm guessing it's not all about the science and the practical stuff. There's got to be more to it than that, right? What about those soft skills everyone always talks about? How important are those?
They're super important. You can be a whiz with chicken genetics, but if you can't communicate or work with a team, you're not going to get very far.
Makes sense. So what are we talking about here? What kind of personality traits are we looking for in a top-notch poultry breeder?
Well, for starters, communication skills are key.
That's gotta be true. You're dealing with so many different people, your team, suppliers, vets.
Exactly. You have to be able to explain things clearly, listen to what others have to say, build those relationships. It's all about communication.
So, good communication skills. Check. What else?
Problem solving is huge, too. Let's face it, things don't always go according to plan on a poultry farm, right?
Right. Weather changes, unexpected outbreaks, those fluctuating market prices we talked about.
Exactly. So you need to be able to think on your feet, analyze the situation, come up with solutions.
So you need to be adaptable, resourceful, basically a chicken MacGyver.
I love that. You're totally right. And then there's teamwork. Poultry breeding isn't a solo act.
Right. It takes a whole team to raise a poultry. Well, they get it.
Exactly. You're all working together,
Yeah.
and being able to collaborate effectively is essential.
And I imagine attention to detail is super important in this line of work too, right?
Oh, absolutely. You're dealing with living creatures, so even small mistakes can have big consequences. You have to be really careful with your record keeping, your observations, all of that.
So thorough, accurate, always striving for perfection, basically.
Pretty much. And on top of all that, you need a solid work ethic.
Yeah.
It's not a 9-to-5 job, poultry breeding. There are going to be long hours, especially during certain times of the year.
So you need to be willing to put in the time, the energy, even when it's tough.
Exactly. But for the right person, someone who's passionate about this work, the rewards can be incredible.
Sounds like it. Now, RoleCatcher does a great job of outlining this pretty traditional career path, starting at the entry level and working your way up. But I'm curious, are there other paths someone with this kind of unique skill set could take in the poultry world? It's not all just like breeding chickens, right?
Yeah.
So it's not always a straight line from cleaning coops to like master chicken breeder. There are other options.
Definitely. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of people love that hands-on work, being right there with the birds. But there are other paths you can take with this skill set, definitely.
Okay, so for those who want to spread their wings a little, what are we talking about? What else can you do with a poultry breeding background besides, actually breeding poultry?
Well, some people move up the management ladder, you know. Instead of running the chicken coops, they end up running the whole show.
Oh, I get it. So more of a corporate type of role.
Yeah, exactly. They might be managing those big breeding programs, overseeing the hatcheries, maybe even leading research and development for a poultry breeding company. Stuff like that.
That's got to be interesting to see your vision for like the future of chicken dinners come to life on a big scale like that. What else? What about the folks who love to solve problems? I bet there are some good fits for them too.
For sure. Some breeders become, like, specialists in a particular area. Maybe they're genetics gurus or nutrition experts, or they really know their stuff about disease control.
Oh, okay. So they could be consultants? Kind of.
Yeah, they work with different poultry farms, helping them improve their programs, troubleshoot problems.
I bet those guys are in high demand. Everyone wants the expert advice, right?
Oh, yeah. And it lets them stay at the top of their game in their little niche of the field. Very cool. So we've got management, we've got consulting. What about the research side of things? Are there opportunities there too?
Absolutely. Some people transition into more research-focused roles. Maybe they end up at a university or a government lab.
Okay, so instead of working directly with the birds, they're studying them, figuring out how to make things even better.
Exactly. They could be doing all sorts of things. Digging into chicken genetics, coming up with new breeding techniques, maybe exploring ways to improve poultry health and welfare even more. It's cutting-edge stuff.
That's really cool. So much potential to make a real impact, even beyond the farm. And speaking of making an impact, what about those folks who are like natural-born entrepreneurs? Are there opportunities for them in this field too?
Oh, tons. I mean, think about it. You could start your own poultry farm, maybe focusing on those rare or heritage breeds we talked about.
Right, or even like creating a special kind of chicken feed or something like that.
Exactly. The possibilities are really endless. It really is amazing to see how much opportunity there is in something that, let's be honest, most of us don't think twice about. It just goes to show there's a whole lot more to poultry farming than meets the eye.
That's one way to put it.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's thinking about, maybe trading in their spreadsheets for some actual feathery chickens, RoleCatcher actually has a whole section on how to ace those poultry breeder interviews, which I thought was super helpful.
They do. And those interviewers don't mess around. Yeah. They want to make sure you know your stuff.
I bet. So, just for fun, let's do a quick round of Are You Smarter Than a Poultry Breeder?
Yeah.
How about you hit us with a couple of those tough interview questions, see if we can handle the heat.
All right, all right. Get ready. Question number 1. How would you go about balancing short-term breeding goals with long-term genetic progress?
Oh, that's a good one. Because it's got to be tempting to just focus on, like, getting the most eggs right now, but...
Yeah. But you got to think big picture, right? A really good answer would probably touch on the importance of looking at a bunch of traits, not just one, making sure there's enough genetic diversity in the flock to avoid problems down the line.
Right. So you're not just thinking about this generation of chickens, you're thinking about the next one and the one after that.
Exactly. You're basically playing the long game.
Okay. Okay, give us another one. I'm ready for a challenge.
All right, how about this? Tell me about your experience working with, say, hatcheries or other folks in the industry.
Ah, so it's not enough to just be a chicken whisperer. You got to be a people person too, huh?
Exactly. Poultry breeding's a team sport. You've got to be able to work with all sorts of people, build those relationships, make sure everyone's on the same page.
All right, last question. Give us a real brain buster.
Okay, here you go. Let's say you're creating a brand new chicken breed. What's its defining characteristic and why?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's not just about, like, knowing the science anymore. It's about having a vision.
Right. You got to know what people want, what the market needs. There are ethical considerations, too. It's a chance to really show off what you're all about.
Well, on that note, I think we've definitely ruffled some feathers today. Who knew the world of poultry breeding was so complex, so interesting, and actually so important?
I know, right?
And for everyone listening, remember, this was just a taste. There is so much more to learn about this amazing field, so don't be chicken. Get out there, do your research, and hey, maybe you'll discover your next big career opportunity. That's it for this deep dive, folks. Until next time.